Okay, so I've heard you guys loud and clear. A lot of you guys have given me feedback on the tier list. There's been a variety of feedback, most of which I've agreed with. Some of the placements don't really make sense, even with the objective scoring system. The scoring system is a little bit imperfect, not a little bit, it's pretty imperfect. It counts too much for perk diversity. It doesn't really represent what a weapon would really be used for. So I really, thought about it recently, and I've been thinking about it while I've been making these tier lists. While I initially wanted to finish doing all the tier lists first, and then make all these changes to make the tier list system better for next season, I started doing rockets. I started tiering rockets on stream, and I was like getting really unhappy because it just didn't feel right after I really articulated this to myself. So I really wanted to fix the tier list first, and the first step to fixing the tier list is, well, the video subject of today, which is tiering origin traits. Because in order to understand, how good a weapon is, part of it is the origin trait. I think I neglected that a little bit too much in some of my past lists. So we're going to go over every single origin trait from an endgame perspective, see if they're useful, see if they're useless. And once we tier them out, then we'll have that information going forward, and we'll really understand, whether an origin trait contributes to a weapon significantly or not. So with that being said, I wanted to make a couple announcements about the tier list going forward. Now, I know a lot of you have been unhappy with the tier list, but a lot of you have been happy as well. And I just kind of wanted to address both sides. I will be keeping the tier list format, so I will be categorizing weapons from an endgame player's perspective, with an S tier, with a D tier, whatever. But I'm also going to be moving my tier list in a certain direction that I feel like is going to be more guidance and more representative of the true state of endgame PvE. So going forward, there's a couple goals that I want to talk about that I'm going to set for myself so that the next time I update this tier list, because keep in mind, the reason why I'm rushing through these tier lists so much is that I want to create a baseline of content that a lot of people can follow along with, can really kind of understand, have some base understanding of how perks work and how archetypes work and whatever. And then that way, over time, I can adjust it. However, I thought it was not bad enough necessarily, but I feel like it would be a waste of my time to make the tier list with this knowledge badly or suboptimally, and then have to go and redo them, right? So every tier list going forward is going to follow this format. Number one, we are going to focus more on goals than score. So right now the tier list is determined entirely by score, and the scoring system is designed by me. I designed it based on perks, archetype, whatever, affinity, competition, as you can see here. But from now on, we're going to orient our tier list around a goal rather than a score. So I already kind of did this, at the start of every tier list video for every single weapon type, I say, machine guns are used for X in endgame PvE. But then the scoring doesn't necessarily align with that goal, right? Some machine guns, for example, machine guns are designed for long range ad clear or whatever. Some machine guns end up in higher tiers that should be lower than other machine guns because they don't meet the goal of, precise long range ad clear with some utility purpose, as well as some of the other guns do. So we're going to redesign the tier list from the ground up so that weapons that are in higher tiers should meet a goal better than just meeting a high score. Okay, so we're going to get rid of the scoring system. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to move perks from being in categories into columns, because right now the scoring system favors weapons that have a bunch of different perks, even if you can't even use those perks at the same time, right? So if you can't even use those perks at the same time, why are we giving extra points? Now, I did try to get around this a little bit by saying that, if a weapon has like Vorpal and Frenzy, then obviously we're not going to give it 2 points. We're going to give it 1 point because you would use Frenzy over Vorpal the vast majority of the time on most weapons, right? So we're talking like heavies, for example. So yeah, I did try to get around that, but we should really try to circumvent that entirely. We should basically represent a weapon's best case scenario. So that's number 5, focus on a weapon's best combo. So if a weapon is extremely well known or very, very strong, like every single person who's using this weapon would use one of 2 roles, like every smart player would use like one of 2 roles, then we're going to focus on those roles. And yes, I will highlight alternatives. So for example, on the sword tier list, I basically discounted energy transfer on every sword because you're not going to use that in in-game PvE. But for example, let's say in the future, there is a case where, swords become very, very strong and you want to be using a sword in something like a GM. And so, you maybe getting your class ability back is something that you value more than ammo. In that case, I should give it a shout out because energy transfer is a good perk. It's just not something that's relevant right now. So I should still highlight alternatives, but we're not going to give weapons, more, a higher tier because of those alternatives. And then finally, I want to be more aware of miscellaneous factors like inventory size. So I'm going to pay more attention when I'm tiering weapons. For example, I was told Avalanche has abnormally low reserves compared to other machine guns in the same archetype. And stuff like Nox Perennial 5 has way more reserves than a typical fusion rifle, a high impact fusion rifle in just in general, high impact fusion rifles in general. So that kind of stuff is stuff that I want to catch, I want to leave, and I want to think about it. And the biggest takeaway, on top of, you know, considering origin traits more seriously, like we just mentioned, that's why we're making this video. But the biggest takeaway here is that when I make a tier list, I want to make it so that I can be confident that a weapon in a higher tier, or even a weapon sub-placed within a tier, is unequivocally better than a weapon below it. There should not be any question of, oh, okay, well, I put this here because so it's such and such. Like, I want to make it so that there is a concrete explanation as to why one weapon is above another, okay? And the scoring system, while it was kind of a nice lazy way of doing that, it wasn't like a very straightforward and like honest, true way of doing it, a very representative way of doing it. So that's why I'm changing this going forward. So that's the announcement I wanted to make. Let's get on with origin traits. I probably should have included a, you know, I'm gonna include a timestamp in case you want to skip this rant. But yeah, let's talk about origin traits. Origin traits are pretty interesting. They were introduced, I don't know, like I think a year and a half ago, and probably even more than a year and a half ago, to be honest. Is it? Yeah, I think like a year and a half ago. But we're going to go over them, all of them actually, in alphabetical order. We're going to tier them in 5 tiers. Now, these tiers you may not recognize as text. This is different from the tiering that I use for weapons, because obviously origin traits are a little bit different. I decided to do them like this. In S tier, we're going to use origin traits that are better than a perk. They're straight up better than like a typical perk. A, we're going to say approximately about equivalent to a perk, so as good as a good perk. B is going to be for origin traits that have a noticeable effect in endgame PvE. However, they're not as good as a perk. C is going to be stuff that's unnoticeable but positive. For example, if a weapon gives you like, you know, slightly more handling or something, or like it gives you a small reload boost, you're not going to notice it, but it's technically a positive effect, right? And then finally in the D tier, we're going to say does nothing. So literally does nothing, as in like it's a PvP only origin trait. Like a Skulking Wolf from Iron Banner is a good example. It does literally nothing in PvE whatsoever. So that's our 5 tiers. And yeah, let's start going off the list. Shout out to D2 Data Compendium. If you guys want to see this information for yourself, they do detailed data collection, community source data collection of all of the stuff in the game, pretty much game mechanics, origin traits, weapon perks, armor mods, all that sort of stuff. And we're going to be using their resource, this wonderful resource here, that gives us a lot more detail than what the game will tell you about certain origin traits and perks. So let's get it started with Alacrity. Alacrity is on Trials weapons. Basically, this is if everyone else is dead, which is quite rare. So basically, if you're solo in PvE, this is a good perk. The range and stability and the aim assist are not very helpful, but the 50 reload speed is. So anytime you're doing solo content with a weapon with Alacrity equipped, you're basically always having 50 reload, which is, you know, that's pretty nice, right? It's pretty good. So what are the weapons that, you know, get this that are notable? I'm also going to talk about what weapons get this origin trait that are useful. And you know, there's a couple of them. I mean, you have Unexpected Resurgence, the Glaive, you have the Trials Machine Gun, you have the Immortal, you know, the SMG, Aisha's, the Scout Rifle, and you have the Summoner. You know, all of these benefit from having a free 50 reload. And let's see over here. Give me 1 second. I think we put this in tier 3. Yeah, we put this in tier 3 or tier B. You know, Alacrity gives you a noticeable effect, but it's rather niche. And I would say that, you know, it's technically A tier, right? It's perk equivalent, or maybe even S tier while you're solo, but because it's pretty niche and you have to be solo to use it, and the weapons that it's available on are not like, you know, super fantastic or anything for this perk in particular, we're gonna put it just in the B tier. Okay, moving on, we have Ambush. Okay, so Ambush, I believe, came with the Seraph weapons. This thing is basically like, if you're not in combat for 5 seconds, so you don't take or receive any damage for 5 seconds, the first damage that you do, the first contact that you make with an enemy for 2 seconds, you do, well, it depends on the weapon type, but around 10% more damage for those 2 seconds. It stacks with everything, and you get a range and handling buff. Now, the problem with Ambush is that while this does sound good in theory, right? Like, for example, maybe you're doing boss DPS, and for the first 2 seconds, you get a free extra 10%, right? Number 1, the weapons that Ambush rolls on are not very good, right? And number 2, the likelihood of any boss DPS phase where you are not taking any damage at all, or doing any damage at all, for 5 entire seconds before damage. And we're talking like you can take any chip damage and Ambush will not proc, right? So, you know, if you're on fire because War Priest is shooting fire at you, if you're waiting to start Templar DPS and he shoots you once, you're not getting ambush. So for that reason, ambush is good in theory, but in practice, you're almost never going to get this to work. And the weapons that it is useful on, like, you know, the linear fusion. So just to kind of quote here, basically just fire and forget. It's just, you know, it's not really good enough, right? It doesn't like, it's just, you're basically never going to get this to proc. So we're going to put this in the C tier. That's ambush. Let's move on to Bitterspite. Okay, so Bitterspite is linked to duality weapons. It's pretty good on Stormchaser and Unforgiven, both of which have relatively low reload, with not a lot of good like manual reload perks. And this thing is really great actually, because upon receiving 20 damage, right, up to 20 damage, and this stacks 5 times, so you basically have to receive half your health bar, right? If you take half your health bar's worth of damage, and it's what is it? Cumulative, right? You get 50 reload. You get 50 reload, and the stacks are consumed when you reload. So basically, if you're just, you know, running around and maybe like, let's say you're doing boss DPS with Stormchaser, and the boss shoots you and you accumulate 100 damage done to your health bar, every time you reload, you're gonna get 50 reload, which is insane. That's very high. That's pretty much gonna max reload on most weapons. And there's a reload duration multiplier as well. So I think this is a really good perk. If this ever gets added to another DPS weapon, or like even a primary, just, you know, this is good on like every weapon type really, because you're taking damage all the time. So it's basically like a free 50 reload all the time. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the A tier. It's in the A tier. It does require you to take damage, but you're taking damage a lot. And I don't know if it's better than a perk. Like, it doesn't, you know, there's some other origin traits that we're gonna place higher than it, but it's very good. It's a very good origin trait, to be certain. Okay, speaking of better than A tier, we have Bray Inheritance. Now, Bray Inheritance, as you can see here, whenever you hit any enemy, so you don't have to kill them, you just have to hit them, do damage to them. Any damage instance, and there's no internal cooldown as well, any damage instance that you do to an enemy. So let's say Commemoration, every single bullet that you hit an enemy with, including weapons that pierce, right? You get a small amount of all 3 of your abilities per hit. And on a weapon like Commemoration, even if it's only 0.4% per hit, let's say, you know, you shoot like 100 shots, right? That's like what, 40% of an ability? Yeah, that's like 40% of all 3 of your abilities for 100 shots. So, you know, this stacks on top of your natural regen. It stacks on top of, you know, just boosts from demo, from, you know, pugilist, stuff like that. So you can easily get a lot of ability energy just from doing damage with Bequest or killing ads with Commemoration. So this is like a really, really solid origin trait. If it was on even better weapons, like higher fire rate weapons, like dude, if this was on a trace rifle, like, oh my god, legendary, like crazy perk, right? Or crazy origin trait. So this is easily S tier. Just, it's good on any weapon, regardless of how these numbers scale. And it doesn't need enhancement to be good. And if this is ever added onto future weapons, even though it's probably not going to be, it'll be good then too. It's not really like dependent on a weapon type. The only thing it wouldn't be good on is like maybe like a rocket or a linear, but I'm sure the numbers will be scaled on the perk, depending on what weapon type, you know, the fire rate of the weapon. So very good perk, very good origin trait, I should say. Trait, I should get used to saying that. And let's move on. Classy Contender. Okay, so Classy Contender, first of all, it's only available on one weapon where it's actually useful. I don't think Terexippos is a good weapon, so I'm just going to exclude it from this conversation. It's pretty much just relevant on the title, which is an aggressive frame void SMG from Guardian Games. And unfortunately, the title is, you know, it's a decent, you know, PvE SMG. It's pretty good. But, you know, it's on kill, right? Something like Bray Inheritance is so good because it's on hit. On SMG kill, you know, this is basically like the equivalent of like Demo or Pugilist, except it's like half the potency. Demo gives you like 10% of your grenade energy. This gives you 5% of your class ability energy per kill. So it's like, yeah, I don't know if it's like a perk equivalent, right? Because if we're thinking, first of all, class abilities tend to be the least useful out of all of the abilities, and 5% of something like a fast charging ability like a dodge, that's almost going to be unnoticeable. So, you know, in certain cases, I would say, you know, it's a noticeable effect, right? But it's kind of teetering there. It's definitely not a perk equivalent. If it was more like 10%, that would be more like a demo equivalent for class abilities, but it's not. 5% is pretty minuscule, and it does require a kill on an SMG right now. So not great, and class ability is arguably like the least useful ability to have up all the time. So yeah, let's move on. Next up we have Cursed Thrall. Cursed Thrall is from Crota's End. These are from the Crota's End weapons. And well, Cursed Thrall isn't really good on most of the Crota's End weapons because you know, it has like a short-ish timer, like a short medium length timer, like 7.5 seconds without enhancement. But on the machine gun specifically, you are getting a lot of kills with a machine gun. And so if you have Cursed Thrall active, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have an internal cooldown on the explosions. So you basically have the equivalent of a more powerful Firefly that doesn't require a headshot kill. And you have it for like 7.5 seconds. You can just spam it. So it's pretty powerful on the machine gun, I think. On other weapons, not so much. But just because it is on the machine gun and on future weapons, again, probably not going to be added to future weapons, but if it is added to future weapons that are good at getting kills, you know, it would be pretty good. But on the machine gun, you know, it's quite good. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in the A tier. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in the A tier. Okay, 1 second. All right, next up we have Dawning Surprise. Okay, so Dawning Surprise is on Dawning weapons, unsurprisingly. And this one's kind of cool, actually. So basically how this works is after you get a certain number of kills, yeah, it's like 6 red bars or like 2 majors / elite / mini bosses / whatever. After you get 6 red bars or 2 orange bar / yellow bar kills, you're going to spawn like this little elemental well looking thing on the ground. And when you pick it up, it gives you 10% of all of your abilities, it gives you some HP, and it starts your health regen. So it's like a little treat. It sounds kind of quirky. The only problem with this origin trait actually is that it takes 6 red bar kills, which is a lot, right? The only weapon you're really going to be doing that on is maybe like Avalanche or maybe Zephyr. Probably only Avalanche though. So, you know, it's not bad on Avalanche. It's just kind of like free ability regen. I'm going to go and put this thing in the B tier. It's a noticeable effect, but it's certainly not a perk equivalent. It requires 6 kills to give you essentially, you know, demo pugilist and then 10% of your class. And then, you know, a little bit of health regen as well. So it's cool. It's quirky. I wouldn't consider it a perk equivalent. So it goes in the B tier. Okay, next up we have Disaster Plan. Okay, this is going to be, I think, our first D tier origin trait. This thing essentially does nothing. First of all, you need to pick up ammo, right? You need to pick up ammo, and then you get 2 PvP assists, which are 15 range and 15% flinch resistance. The only thing that really, you know, perked my attention here when I first saw this was swords receive 100 charge rate. Now, I'm assuming this is on ammo pickup, and it's for 1.5 seconds. So you're not going to be picking up ammo repeatedly during damage with a sword. So this is essentially useless. I don't think this does anything in PvE, essentially. So I'm just going to put this thing in the D tier, and I don't think I really need to explain much about that. Dreamwork is next. So Dreamwork did get patched. Originally when it came out, it was overflowing weapons that were not the Dreamwork weapon. However, now, ever since the 20 mag Horseman incident, Dreamwork now only loads or overflows the weapon with Dreamwork. And speaking of Dreamwork, you know, what weapons actually have Dreamwork that are notable? In my opinion, there's only 2 of them. There's Compass Rose and Crowning Duologue. So the Precision Shotgun and the Strand Rocket, the Strand Precision Rocket, okay? So those 2 weapons, I mean, I can see assists overflowing your mag being kind of helpful on something like Duologue, you know, getting 2 in the mag when you don't have bipod, or, you know, something like Compass Rose, getting just extra shots in the mag, like kind of pseudo overflow. But besides that, you know, this trait is not that useful. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. I'm going to put it in the B tier. It is noticeable. You'll definitely notice it while you're playing, especially if you play intentionally around it. But I don't think it's a perk equivalent. It's not as good as something like Overflow, or certainly not as good as something like Runneth Over, which we'll discuss later. Next up, we have Explosive Pact. Those of you who use Apex Predator a lot have probably seen this on the left side of your screen and been like, what is that? Well, I'm here to tell you, well, it's not very good because you probably haven't even noticed what it does. But Explosive Pact, it gives you some stat boosts. The only thing you're probably going to notice is the reload. And all it does is anytime you get a grenade kill, or use your grenade, or throw a healing grenade at your allies, you get stacks. And the stacks, if you max out your stacks, you get a fair amount of reload, right? You basically max your reload on Apex, and it lasts 7.5 seconds. However, on the only weapon where this thing is kind of useful, which in my opinion is Apex, you're not manually reloading Apex most of the time. And if you are manually reloading Apex, you know, you're probably in a Luna well. So, and Apex already has pretty high reload, right? So, I don't know. This Explosive Pact is pretty useless in my opinion. We're going to put it in the unnoticeable but positive tier because, you know, like I said, it does increase your reload. Are you going to notice it 9 times out of 10? Probably not. Okay, let's move on to Extrovert. Okay, so Extrovert was brought to my attention because of a lot of the Nezarix Whisper fans. They were like, yo, Extrovert makes this glaive like really good. Now that being said, I think Extrovert, you know, the 80 HP healing on Enhanced is pretty noticeable. I think 40 HP is pretty small. Basically, if you're surrounded by enemies and you kill something with this trait on, you get 40 HP, and then you have to wait 3 seconds before you can kill something again to get 40 HP again. Now, 40 HP, not a lot, right? That's like, you know, what, like 1/5? Not even 1/5. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's 1/5. 1/5 your health, which is like, you know, it's a small chunk. Certainly better than some of the other health restoring traits that we're going to talk about later down the line. But, you know, it's not that much. I think it needs to be enhanced to really be noticeable. But that being said, you know, it is positive. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in the... I think we're going to put it... Given the enhanced status and the potential for that, I think I'm going to put it here. And 3 seconds of an internal cooldown is not that bad either. Yeah, I'm gonna put in perk equivalent. It's certainly not S tier, and I think it's bordering on B tier, but if I look at some of the stuff in B tier, I think it deserves to be higher than B tier. So it's probably like the bottom of A tier. Okay, let's move on. Field tested. Okay. I'm not gonna force you to read this. This is really long. I'm just gonna give you a summary. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a summary. Basically, how field tested works is anytime you kill something or you hit something with this weapon, you start gaining stacks, okay? And the stacks never disappear until you die. And so the way the stacks work is the higher number of stacks that you have, the more of a buff that you get to certain stats, okay? So the buffs are listed here. You get range stability, probably irrelevant for PvE. You get handling, which is nice. You get reload speed, which is also nice. And on swords, you get charge rate and guard resistance. There's only one sword that gets this. That's Nazredin, which is, you know, it's a decent adaptive for damage, so I guess it's fine. But the amount of kills and the amount of hits that you need for this to like work properly is a lot. To reach the high stacks, you need a lot of stacks. I mean, you can see these numbers. You need a lot of stacks, okay? So because of that, you know, it's like an okay trait to have, but it's not something you're probably going to notice. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the C tier. Like, you're not generally playing in PvE for long enough alive that you're going to notice and really get up to these max stacks on most weapons. And at that point, it's just like, you know, it's just kind of like silly. You know, it's something like, it's very, very background. You're not going to notice this really. So field tested is going to go in the C tier, the unnoticeable tier. Okay, Hakke breach armaments, or I think we skipped over something. Oh, gun and run is not even, where's run? Okay, they moved it down here by accident. Okay, this is supposed to be up there because it starts with a G. But gun and run is the gambit trait. And basically, if you kill 2 enemies within 3 seconds, you get increased sprint speed for 10 seconds. So this is nice because there's very few things in the game that increase your movement speed. There's exotics that do it, holding a lightweight does it, but this is an origin trait and not a perk. So, you know, this is kind of nice. I think the only other thing that like increases your movement speed is like Assassin's Blade, but you know, that's sword exclusive. So gun and run, pretty niche, but it is definitely noticeable. It's definitely noticeable. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier, especially on weapons where, you know, you're pretty like sluggish. This thing rolls on the Gambit machine gun. It rolls on the Ritual Glaive. It rolls on Dead Weight. It rolls on all the Gambit primaries like Borrowed Time. It rolls on Chain of Command as well. So it rolls on a bunch of weapons that, you know, it's better than an unnoticeable perk. I would say it's better than an unnoticeable trait. So I'm going to go ahead and put gun and run in the B tier. Obviously, it's probably going to be bottom of B tier, but it's certainly, yeah, it's certainly cool. It's a nice thing to have, right? Sprinting a little bit faster. Yeah, okay, let's keep going. That's gun and run. We have Hakke breach armaments. Now, this is very situational. It increases your damage against vehicles, which is kind of nice. There was one season where people were using it on like the arms dealer GM to like kill the tanks faster using Ragnhild. Now that's very, very situational, but I would say it's certainly better than unnoticeable, right? It has its place, and I think it might be useful on certain primaries. Granted, the primaries that it's available on are pretty bad, but you know, it might be useful on certain primaries to break stasis crystals faster on, you know, on stasis builds. As for the weapons that actually roll this thing that are like useful, I think it's pretty much restricted to Ragnhild. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I mean, if you ever need to kill tanks or kill vehicles quickly in a certain objective or in a certain activity, Hakke breach is useful. But again, this is very situational, but it's above C tier. You're gonna notice a lot of, you know, a lot of traits pool in the B tier because they do something. They are noticeable, but what that thing is not particularly helpful most of the time. Okay, so that's Hakke breach armaments. Let's move on to Harmonic Resonance. This is related to the Root of Nightmares weapons. So we're talking conditional finalities included. All of the Ron weapons are included, as well as epochal integration, which came out recently, even though that's not technically a root weapon. So this basically how this trait works is if you have another weapon with the same trait, you get a bonus. And if you have all 3 of your weapons with the same trait or their conditional finality, then you get another bonus. Okay, so with all 3 of your weapons from Root of Nightmares or / with this trait, you get with the enhanced version 20% increased damage, which is actually quite nice. Now, unfortunately, none of the weapons that get this trait are really, really meta for damage. The only thing that gets close is the Surrounded Briars. Surrounded Briars is pretty good for damage, but every other weapon that comes from Root of Nightmares isn't really relevant for damage for the most part, and this requires you to be enhanced, right? So most of the time, most seasons, you're not going to have this enhanced. It's going to be just a 10% increase, and this increase to damage is only on certain enemies. So the Ghost of the Deep bosses and Nezarec, that's pretty much it. So, you know, pretty restricted pool of enemies that we're talking about here, pretty niche. So I'm pretty much forced to put this thing in the B tier, kind of like Hakke Breach Armaments. It is a damage increase, but you need all 3 of your weapons to have this trait for it to be noticeable. And you also need to be in certain activities, basically just 2, Root of Nightmares and Ghost of the Deep. So very, very niche, but it does something. I'm just going to put it, I'm going to slap it somewhere in here. Yeah, I think like, maybe like here is good, you know, here. Somewhere in here, yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's move to Head Rush. Head Rush is another D tier trait. I'm not going to spoil anything. Or I'm not going to not spoil anything. I mean, this thing is literally, it's designed for PvP, right? It's like after you've been crouching in a corner, you know, and being a gym for a while, and you uncrouch, you get handling and reload, which is like, you're not ever going to do this in PvE unless you're intentionally trying to proc it. And 10 reload speed is like nothing. that's like yeah, it's just an easy D tier. I don't think we need to talk about it. I'm not even going to tell you what weapons it rolls on because it's just not a good origin trait at all. It's probably, maybe it's possibly the worst origin trait on this list. We'll see. We'll keep going through this list. It might be the worst one. Okay, next up we have Hot Swap. This is on the Dares weapons, right? So all the craftable Dares weapons get Hot Swap, and basically Hot Swap, if you take damage and then you switch to the weapon, you get a bunch of handling. And swords in particular get a lot of charge rate, as well as a lot of guard properties, which are nice. So yeah, the Eager Edge swords, they all have this. And it's pretty nice. You switch to the sword and you instantly get 100 charge rate as long as you've taken damage, which is a very, very, you know, you take damage pretty much all the time playing Destiny. So this is always going to work out. And on weapons like Wastelander, on weapons like Pardon Our Dust, on weapons like Retrace Path, basically guarantees that when you swap to the weapon, you are going to swap to it and have very high handling for as long as you're going to use the weapon for most cases. So it's a very, very nice QOL perk. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in the B tier, noticeable effect. I wouldn't call it a perk equivalent. It's certainly not as good as a good perk, but I'm going to go ahead and put it probably like at the top of B tier. It's one of the best noticeable effect origin traits. Okay, let's keep going and let's talk about Land Tank. So Land Tank is really nice actually. So the way Land Tank works is every time you get a kill, a 5-second timer is started, and you get 5% DR. I mean, the resilience, most of you are running 100 resilience anyway, so I'm going to ignore that because it doesn't go over 100. But you get 5% damage resist, which I believe stacks up to 3 times. So that's 15% extra DR, and 15% DR for an origin trait is like insane. That's like really good. For reference, like stuff like Psychohack is restricted to a single combatant and is only 10% DR. So this, you get DR against everything, and you just have to get kills repeatedly. And luckily enough for Land Tank, there are 2 weapons that have Land Tank that are guaranteed to get kills rapidly. You have Explosive Personality, and you have Recurrent Impact, which are both, you know, great at getting kills. One's a wave frame, one's a machine gun. So you're almost always going to have full Land Tank stacks. And when this thing is enhanced, it's like, you know, it's even better because you have double the duration. 10 seconds is a really long time to be getting 1 kill to refresh the timer. So yeah, this thing is really, really great. 15% DR pretty much on demand with, you know, good ad clear weapons. Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and put this thing in the S tier. Probably a little bit worse than Bray Inheritance, but yeah, very, very good nonetheless. Very, very good for endgame. And it's what makes Explosive Personality a very solid wave frame. One of the things that makes Explosive Personality very good. Okay, let's move to Nadir Focus. Nadir Focus, I believe, is relatively recent. Unfortunately, the first half of this trait, range, accuracy cone, and projectile velocity, these are pretty much irrelevant for PvE. So the only relevant thing is lunge distance. And unfortunately, this is not going to make the sword better than Eager Edge. You can repeatedly kind of long skate with the sword, but nobody really uses this thing in speedrunning where you might expect increased lunge distance to be useful. And certainly increased lunge distance from rapid swinging is not something that is very useful on a sword in PvE. So this thing it's noticeable. You'll definitely notice if you're using this thing. But is it like a good noticeable? Does it actually do anything for you? Not really. So I can't really, you know, noticeable effect kind of says that noticeable effect does something for you. Nadir Focus, you know, it doesn't really do anything for you. So I'm gonna go put it in the C tier. It doesn't really deserve to play up here because these traits actually do something for you. And Nadir Focus, that, you know, lunging repeatedly doesn't really do anything for you in PvE. So I'm gonna leave that where it is. And just for reference, because I didn't mention the specific weapon that rolls this, it's Geodetic HSM. People were talking about this sword initially when it released because of this origin trait, and then they discovered that it's not actually useful and everyone stopped using it. So yeah, that's it for Nadir Focus. Nanotech Tracer Rocket. So this is the Neomuna origin trait. So it's on weapons like Dimensional Hypodracoid and Circular Logic. Those are the two main weapons where it's useful. That being said, this weapon, this trait, I should say, it's nice. It's actually quite good. The rocket actually does a fair amount of damage from what I remember. And so I'm going to place it in the A tier because there's basically no other origin trait on this list that straight up boosts damage, right? This basically acts as a free extra amount of damage. The only other thing on this list that comes close is Ambush, and Ambush is almost never going to proc, right? This thing is proc by just hitting an enemy repeatedly, right? The only bad thing about Nanotech Tracer Rockets is that the two weapons that it would be relevant on, which are Dimensional and Circular Logic, are not very good, right? I mean, Dimensional is pretty much irrelevant now for damage, and Circular Logic, it's okay. It's just fine. It's not great. It's not one of the best machine guns out there, but it's fine. It's fine. You know, Nanotech does, you know, help Circular Logic do a little bit more damage. Yeah, but that's pretty much all I have to say about Nanotech Tracer Rockets. As you can see here, you know, the percentage of your capacity that you need to hit enemies with changes based on weapon type, and it's best on like machine guns, which is why, you know, Circular Logic is a good fit for it. Okay, let's move to Noble Deeds. I think I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit here for us to actually like see the whole tier list once we add everything in. Okay, so Noble Deeds is a bit of an interesting one. I think it's quite underrated actually. So the way Noble Deeds works is anytime you heal or revive or empower or apply any, you know, 3.0 buff to your teammates, so like Radiant is included here. Anytime you apply any of those things to your teammates, you get a full 10 stacks of Noble Deeds. And that means that you can essentially kill 10 things for every time that you heal, you know, empower, Radiant, whatever your teammates, which is a lot. You know, killing 10 enemies with this weapon is a fair amount. And basically you get handling, reload speed, and swords in particular, which there's only one sword that gets this, which is Caretaker. Swords in particular basically have a free charge rate boost that doesn't get consumed from doing damage. So a lot of the charge rate related boosts on this trait list are either temporary or require you to expel them after you do damage. And Noble Deeds last forever until you get kills. So this is actually pretty good. It's great on Caretaker. It means that you don't have to run, you know, a bunch of Loosened Blades. You can just run one or two. And the handling and reload speed, while it doesn't say an exact number, if it's literally any positive number, it's like a good perk. It's like a pretty good perk because you're going to be doing this all the time if you're playing on like any solar subclass pretty much. So Noble Deeds is pretty good. I'm going to give that a 3 tier. I'm going to put it probably somewhere near the top. Yeah, probably up here. Pretty underrated. I think it's a pretty good origin trait. I keep saying perk. Anyways, Omolon Fluid Dynamics is next. This is basically like compulsive reloader. It's literally compulsive reloader. Like the lower your mag gets and closer to 50% it gets, the less and less reload speed buff you're gonna get off of this. But this is pretty good on certain weapons where you're gonna be constantly reloading. And so that's like primaries like Hung Jury and Amit, which this rolls on, and notably Path of Least Resistance. And the reason for that is because usually with Path of Least Resistance, it has Volt Shot, and you're probably gonna just like kill an ad with like maybe 6-7 trace ammo. You're gonna reload it, and then boom, you'll have Volt Shot. So Omolon Fluid Dynamics is, you know, the reason why Path of Least Resistance feels so good when you're trying to get Volt Shot off of it, because even if it doesn't have max reload, this guarantees that it does, as long as you're not like, you know, at the bottom half of your mag. So Omolon Fluid Dynamics is very situational, but it is good on that weapon that I mentioned, Path, that it rolls on. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the 3 tier. Again, not perk equivalent, pretty situational, but it's pretty good on what it rolls on. Probably like right around here. You know, it's pretty situational. Okay. Let's go to One Quiet Moment. Now, One Quiet Moment on first glance looks very similar to Ambush, right? It gives you a stat buff if you haven't been in combat for 5 seconds. Now, the game won't tell you this, but for whatever reason, apparently the people at Compendium found this out, that if you kill something and then you don't take or receive damage for 1.5 seconds instead of 5 seconds, it triggers. So basically what you would want to use this on is a weapon where you're finished clearing up a room, right? Maybe like a rocket or something like that. You're finished cleaning house in a room, and you know you're not going to take damage after that. and then you want to like reload after that, right? So whatever the situation that might be, that's kind of where you'd want to use this origin trait. Now that being said, that's a pretty rare circumstance. Like after you finish clearing out a room, you're probably just going to reload immediately and not wait 1.5 seconds. So, you know, this origin trait is, you know, you're probably never going to get this to proc either. It's a little better than ambush because of this condition, this 1.5 second, like, you know, timer shortening thing. But besides that, it's like, it's not great. I'm going to put it like probably at the top of C tier. Again, you're probably not going to notice this thing. It's very unlikely that you're going to end up using this thing unless you're shooting while out of combat and reloading while out of combat, which is, you're generally not doing that. Okay, Psychohack. Psychohack is another one that I think is kind of overrated. A lot of people were like, hey, Psychohack is like, you know, you're reducing the amount of damage a boss does to you. But first of all, the weapons that roll Psychohack currently are not very good. Most of them are primaries, and primaries that are not very good. And of the ones that are not primaries, you basically have the Enigma. The Enigma, you're gonna have to hit something with this multiple times. The only reason I even mentioned the Enigma is because, you know, you might be blocking a boss from shooting you, or like a champ from shooting you, and if you hit it twice, you'll proc Psychohack. But besides that, you know, it's only 10%, right? 10% is almost unnoticeable. There's other stuff that, you know, gives you 15% DR. Woven Mail is like much higher DR than this. 10% is almost unnoticeable. Yeah, I don't think Psychohack is really, like, Sever is better than this. Yeah, if you want to reduce a target's damage, like, Overload is better than this. Like, you're literally better off just finding the Overload weapon from the artifact perks from that season and just shooting the boss with that weapon. And if that's, you know, that's a better way of proccing, like, a damage reduction. That's 25 decreased damage, 25% rather than 10. So, yeah, Psychohack, I think it's very overrated. I honestly think it's unnoticeable. I think it's unnoticeable. It's a positive effect, probably one of the best positive effects in this tier list, in this tier, but it's unnoticeable in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Rasputin's Arsenal. Dude, someone was telling me that I was giving like some of the Ikelos weapons a hard time because this is a good origin trait. Dude, are you serious? 50, this is like Genesis, right? This is like Genesis, except Genesis reloads your mag completely, number one, and number two, Genesis isn't a good perk to begin with. Okay, Genesis isn't a good perk to begin with. The only like scenario in endgame PvE where you would even want to use Genesis in general is for barrier champions, for an anti-barrier weapon. And there's still other perks that I would rather have than Genesis, like Rapid Hit, or I don't know, like auto-loading, that are just better than Genesis. So in my opinion, this thing is like, yeah, it's not good. It's not very good. I think it's frankly almost unnoticeable most of the time. I mean, maybe like if we get anti-barrier SMG, it would be good on Ikelos SMG. The only reason people even see this thing as an upside is because the weapons that it rolls on only have this as an origin trait, so you kind of have to see it as an upside. If there was any alternative origin trait that was even decent to the Ikelos weapons, people would not be giving this thing praise. This is not a good origin trait, it is extremely situational, and even in situations where it is used, it's 50% of your mag, it's not your full mag. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing probably like, you know, over here with Psychohack, you know? It does something, but it's not like something that's noticeable almost ever. Okay. Next up, we have Right Hook. Okay, oh, actually, where's Restoration Ritual? Why is it down here? Okay, so some alphabetical order mix-up here, it seems, in Compendium. I guess we'll do Restoration Ritual because that's technically before in the alphabetical order. A lot of people are aware of this origin trait because of Cold Comfort. You finish an ad and it allows you to shoot 4 rockets in a row on top of the, you know, original 3 that you had. With Envious, you get a 4th one with Restoration Ritual. Now, that being said, besides Cold Comfort and that niche damage scenario, this is not a very good origin trait. I mean, the other weapons that this thing rolls on are all the GOA weapons, right? So the SMG, the Glaive, and the Waveframe. And out of those weapons, I don't think it's very good on the SMG, right? On the Glaive, it's okay. And on the Waveframe, it's like, it's decent. It kind of acts like Ambitious if you have it active. But the amount of times you're getting a finisher intentionally to get this thing to proc is like kind of low. Like, unless you're actively thinking about using this, you're not going to notice it, to be honest with you. And the only time you're actively thinking about using a perk like this or a trait like this is on Cold Comfort. So because of that, it's pretty situational. I'm going to put it into the B tier. It has a noticeable effect, and the effect is positive. It's good. It's just like you're only using it on one weapon. On the Glaive and the Wave, like, you have to like finish things and then think about the fact that you have it ready. And it's like, I really don't think most players do that, and I don't think they should do that because it's not that good of an effect that you should like care about it, you know? Okay, anyways, let's keep going. Runneth Over is next. Now, Runneth Over is a big shame. Okay, actually, sorry, we're gonna jump back up. Okay, I'm going down this list. We're gonna go to Right Hook. Okay, someone was trying to tell me in my YouTube comments that Plank Stride is good because it has right hook. And like, I don't know if you and I are seeing the same origin trait, but 10 range and 10 aim assist in PvE is useless. That does nothing for you. This is essentially strictly a PvP origin trait that does literally nothing for you. Look, the uptime is great. The uptime is great, but it's 10. 10 is very small of a boost. I mean, to range is not bad, but those two stats are like useless in PvE. So I'm just gonna put this where it belongs. We're gonna put it in the D tier right over here. It's very bad, and we're gonna move on. Runneth Over. Okay, Runneth Over is actually a very good origin trait. I think it goes, well, right off the bat, I'm gonna tell you that it goes in the A tier, right? It goes in the A tier. Probably deserves to be like up here next to Bitterspite, maybe even above Bitterspite. This thing basically guarantees that you get like overflow if you're near a bunch of teammates. It's really good in raids where you have a bunch of teammates near you, and when enhanced, it's very, very good. It basically guarantees that you overfill your mag every single time you reload as long as you're near someone else, which is really, really great. The only problem is that this rolls on the King's Fall weapons, and the King's Fall weapons are almost all not very good. Out of the King's Fall weapons, the ones that would probably benefit from this the most are like the machine gun, so Q-Limbs, the sniper, Defiance, and Midas Reckoning. Specifically Midas Reckoning, it benefits from this because of Reservoir Burst, and then obviously for stuff like Q-Limbs, you have a longer killing tally proc, and then for stuff like the sniper, you know, you do just more one mag DPS. But again, none of those weapons are particularly strong in the meta right now. And, you know, if we ever get another weapon with a raid exclusive trait like this one, maybe like a rocket or something, you know, that'd be pretty cool, you know, if it rounds up. But besides that, you know, unfortunately, this has been wasted on some pretty mediocre weapons. Okay, and of course it requires you to manually reload too, which isn't great either. Okay, let's go to Search Party. Search Party is the Festival of the Lost origin trait. And so the only weapon that Search Party is really relevant on is the Sniper, Macabre. And it's not very good. First of all, you have to practically be solo because no one has to be near you within like 15 meters. And the only thing it does for you for like PvE is like ADS reduction, like ADS time reduction, which is like, who cares in PvE? And, you know, in PvP, it's basically for like, I don't know, people were talking about it being like a lone wolf perk. But again, this is not a PvP tier list. So I'm just going to put this in the D tier and move on. It's practically useless. No one cares about ADS reduction and you have to be solo. So yeah, let's move on. We have Skulking Wolf next. And like I said earlier, this is an example of a trait that does literally nothing in PvE whatsoever. So that's going in the D tier. And we're going to move on. Souldrinker. Souldrinker is our third and final S tier origin trait. This thing is like, it's like unrelenting, but doesn't require any hits. And what makes this thing really special actually is specifically, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but forbearance. Now, the way Souldrinker works is that it gives you more healing depending on the number of hits that you hit enemies with whatever you're shooting. And then it also takes into account the full size of your magazine. So for example, if you're using submission and you hit your entire magazine on an enemy, you will get more health than if you hit half your magazine. Now, the thing about forbearance is that it's a wave frame. So number one, you're going to hit multiple enemies per shot. And number two, it has a mag size of 1. So you're almost always going to be proccing the full effect of Souldrinker, which means every time you hit enemies and then reload, you're going to get a crap load of your health back. This is basically like Vanguard's Vindication, or like Extrovert, but on crack. This is like a way better version of Extrovert. It doesn't require kills. It doesn't require you to be surrounded. There's no internal cooldown, and it's on a weapon like Forbearance, right? Of a friggin' wave frame, which you're getting tons of kills, tons of hits with. So yeah, Souldrinker is easily S tier. Maybe even like the top of S tier. Yeah, it's an excellent perk. If it ever goes on anything else, I mean, it's probably not going to get much better than a wave frame, but you know, it would be pretty solid as well, regardless of the weapon type. But a wave frame in particular is absolutely excellent for Souldrinker. Okay, we're down to our last, I don't know, how much is this, like 8? Yeah, we're down to our last 8 origin traits. Let's talk about Stunning Recovery. I think Stunning Recovery is an origin trait that a lot of people don't talk about. This is pretty good. This is pretty good. I mean, let's read it, right? You get a 25% mag refill, which is not very good on most weapons, but on stuff like rockets, it does round up. It does actually round up. So I did some testing the other day. When I say the other day, I mean like last year, but I did some testing at one point with Ritz with Seeking Filaments, which gives all of your weapons overload. And if you stun an overload champion with like Hothead using Seeking Filaments, it instantly reloads your Hothead. So that's kind of like a fun fact, you know, a cool quirk. But besides that, the main stuff here is you basically start healing. You basically start healing and you get health every time you send a champ, which, you know, in a GM, that can be pretty useful, especially if you're like solo. And this rolls on a bunch of viable primaries for GM, actually. So I'm going to list them off here. We have Palindrome, Duty Bound, Malicious for Unstopped GL, Hung Jury, Buzzard, Loaded Question for Unstopped Fusion, Warden's Law, and Pre-Astyanax 4, which is, you know, for like Overload Bow. So it has a bunch of good primaries associated with it. And yeah, you get like a free partial reload, which, you know, you're not using much of your primary ammo to stun a champion anyway. And you get free healing. So I honestly think this is a pretty good origin trait. I'm going to actually go ahead and put this in the top of B tier. I'm going to put this in the top of B tier just because it's restricted to champion content. It's not universal. But in that content, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I'm going to put it like somewhere right here. I think it's right next to the hot swap. I think that's fair. Okay, let's talk SUROS Synergy. SUROS Synergy, I mean, this is practically designed for PvP. The only difference between this and some of the other PvP origin traits is that it boosts handling, which can be kind of useful in PvE, but, you know, really not much. I don't know. There's a couple weapons that roll this that I thought like might kind of use SUROS Synergy's handling boost, which are like Fortissimo, Fugue, and Staccato. But again, like, you're basically forcing a manual reload to get a handling boost on a weapon that you already swapped to. So the only handling boost that you would benefit from in that case is like ADS time, which is like, I don't think anyone really, maybe on the sniper you'd care a little bit. And then like swap off time, which is like stow time. Like, I don't think anyone cares about that either. So this is, in my opinion, this is basically a does nothing perk. I mean, it's more useful than something like right hook, but I don't think it's even like, I wouldn't even put it in the C tier, like an unnoticeable positive. Like something like Psychohack is easily like, you know, it is actually a positive effect. I don't think 40 handling after you've swapped to a weapon is a positive effect. And it requires a manual reload, like I said. So pretty mid, pretty bad. Okay, next up we have Tex Balanced Stock. This is from the Spire of the Watcher weapons. Now, unfortunately, this requires you to hit hip fire shots. And this rolls on stuff like long arm. And I would not recommend hip firing long arm in PvE. But if you're going to use this origin trait, there is one weapon that might turn the tides in its favor, which is why I've actually placed this thing in C tier instead of D tier, which I'll go ahead and do that right now, actually. And that's Wilderflight. And Wilderflight does actually proc Tex Balanced Stock semi-reliably, because it shoots 2 shots. So as long as you know, shoot Wilderflight pretty much twice in a row, or even let it autoload and, you know, shoot an enemy, hit both the projectiles, you know, twice in a row, you get a free reload boost, you get a reload duration multiplier. So that's pretty nice, and you get some handling, right? And Wilderflight does benefit from that, you know. It's not a lightweight, so it doesn't have, you know, cracked handling like most GLs do. So it benefits from that a little bit, but this is basically an origin trait that exists to serve one weapon. So it's in the C tier. Okay, we're down to our last 5, and we have 2 Excess. Okay, this one might make people mad. 2 Excess, it basically gives you plus 20 discipline and strength every time you get a weapon kill while you have full super. And it does last a decent amount of time, 12 seconds. But, you know, it's like running Font of Focus, or like, you know, Font of Vigor. I think that's the strength one. And but it requires your super to be full, and it's, I don't know, it's not great. I mean, most people in most activities are running 100 discipline when they need 100 discipline, and most people are running 100 strength when they need 100 strength. And you're probably not going to be using this weapon to obtain that uptime, and it doesn't go past 100. So unless you're intentionally sabotaging your stats to have 80 discipline or 80 strength, I really don't think this origin trait is all it's cracked up to be. I'm still gonna give it, you know, a B tier, but it's like kind of at the bottom of B tier. Like, yeah, it's really like, yeah, I think this is vastly overrated. I don't know a single endgame PvE player that doesn't run 100 discipline when they need nades, or doesn't run 100 strength when they need strength. So yeah, and to be like having to kill everything, having to kill enemies like every 12 seconds while your super is full just to have this benefit is like not it, in my opinion. There's much better origin traits than this. Okay, what do we have next? Unsated Hunger. Unsated Hunger. Okay, this is from the season of the deep weapons, I believe. So stuff like Until Its Return, stuff like Rapacious Appetite, stuff like Thin Precipice, all have Unsated Hunger. Unfortunately, this is not a very good trait because it requires that all 3 of your abilities are not charged, which is pretty uncommon in PvE, I would say. Most Warlocks often have at least their Rift or their melee up. Most Titans usually have a melee up, and Hunters usually have their dodge up. So their dodge or their melee up, I guess. So yeah, this is usually not really a good trait. I mean, it does boost your stats by a fair amount, but to have to use all 3 of your abilities just to have this active, not very good in my opinion. And you know, if you want to make benefit of this consistently, you have to actually think about doing that, which for the benefit that it's, if it was like a damage boost, maybe, but, or like a fire rate boost, right? Like, you know, it's like a hunger perk, so it kind of makes sense to have a fire rate boost, but it doesn't. The only thing I would really like maybe think about here is the charge rate on swords, because that is actually a DPS boost, depending on the combo changes you can do. However, unfortunately, the only sword that this rolls on is Thin Precipice, and Thin Precipice is not relevant for damage. So, yeah, I don't think this is really relevant. I'm gonna go ahead and put Unsated Hunger in the C tier, because it's, you know, it boosts your stats, probably when you aren't paying attention, and probably when it doesn't matter. So, very, very small proportion of the time. I'm gonna put this, I don't know, somewhere like here. Yeah, we're gonna put it there. Okay, last 3, Vanguard's Vindication. Okay, I mean, you can see this here. You get 7 health on a weapon kill. So on primaries, you're not gonna notice this at all, because you're killing 1 enemy at a time with primaries. And 7 health is like a hair, like a pixel on your screen. So you're not gonna notice that. So what weapons will you notice this on? Well, probably rockets. Rockets with Wolf Pact, you know, you're killing maybe like 5 ads, get 35 health, right? That's noticeable, right? Unfortunately, you know, I mean, this rolls on like Loaded Question. I guess you can use it with Reservoir Burst. Rolls on Osprey. Swarm is a machine gun, and it rolls on Chain of Command. It has, you know, Hothead, I guess. But really, you know, this is just almost unnoticeable. Like, the amount of health this gives you is practically unnoticeable. It's like 7 health, right? You gotta kill a lot of enemies to get this to really matter. So I'm gonna put this, you know, probably at the top of C tier next to Psychohack. Yeah, similar viability, just you're not gonna notice this in regular content. And I don't know, I don't think anybody is waking up and thinking, man, I'm really glad Hothead has Vanguard's Vindication, so that when I kill 5 ads with my wolf packs, I get 35 health back. I don't think anyone's thinking that. So yeah, we're gonna leave Vanguard's Vindication in the C tier. Okay, final 2, VEIST Stinger. Okay, VEIST Stinger, this might come as a surprise to some people. VEIST Stinger sucks now. I'm just gonna say it, like, VEIST Stinger sucks. It's really bad now. First of all, it's one thing that it's like the probability of it activating is low, right? It's very low. On the 2 weapon types where it is useful, linear fusions and swords, it takes forever. I did some testing on the side, like, I don't know, about a month ago on Gold Tusk, which is a sword that rolls VEIST Stinger, because Gold Tusk has extremely low charge rate. 3 Loosened Blades is not enough to max out the charge rate on Gold Tusk, and I wanted to see if I could do some fast combos. And I went to Morgith, and I was hitting him at some points like 25 times in a row, and I wasn't getting VEIST Stinger to proc. Like, this thing is ridiculously bad now. The chances on swords are bad. The chances on linears are bad. It's 10% per shot, right? You're probably not even shooting 10 shots per mag on something like reeds, right? So this thing is really, really bad. And now it's only a 25% mag refill, right? That is horrible. That is horrible. This thing is basically like, it's like Stunning Recovery, except Stunning Recovery is guaranteed. This thing is like, you have, like, VEIST Stinger is so low of a chance to activate and so bad of a refill on your mag now that you are likely to not even notice it when it goes off. Like, you'll see it on the side of your screen and be like, oh, that's cool, and then not even notice what it did to your gun. Like, you're not gonna notice it. So VEIST Stinger is really bad. I'm actually gonna put it in the C tier. It's like, the effect is that bad. Like, 25% is like, bleh, bleh. You know, it's bad. It's really bad. It's probably top of C tier, but like, oh my god, that is like really terrible now. Really, really awful. It's just so low probability. There's nothing you can do to plan for it. There's nothing you can do to like increase the chance that it's gonna happen. And there's like, yeah, there's a 4-second cooldown too between reactivations. Yeah, that's terrible. It's just a terrible origin trait now. I don't know why they did that to VEIST. I mean, even if Reeds still had pre-nerf VEIST, it wouldn't be meta. So they can really just undo the nerf now. I really like it if they did, because they would make it a cool origin trait. It'd be like A or S now, and it wouldn't be unbalanced. It wouldn't be broken. But I don't know. Bungie has to have their way, I guess. I don't know, whatever. Anyways, rant aside, we finally are done with Wildcard. Wildcard is like the Telesto origin trait. Out of the weapons that it rolls on, I think there's only 2 that it's really strong on. The Vanguard bow, so Priest Ionix 4, and Quasiphon 5, which is the Gambit machine gun. Because, you know, Priest Ionix, you know, you're shooting individual ads, you know, there's a chance that they drop bolts, you know, it's cool. It's like a little splash, you know, ad clear perk. And then the machine gun, you're killing lots of ads with, so you're gonna get this thing to proc fairly often, and you're gonna leave some bolts on the ground. However, you know, the bolts are not, you know, they're basically Telesto bolts. I mean, they're fine and all, but, you know, if it was like a guaranteed drop for them, it would be nice. but unfortunately it's only a chance to drop them. And it's, you know, they don't do that much damage. Like if you kill a red bar, it only, I think it just drops like 1 bolt. Yeah, it's not that much. And there's a cooldown too between bolt spawns. Yeah, it's not a great perk. It's kind of just quirky. It's almost like VEIST Stinger where you're like notice it sometimes, be like, oh, that's weird, and then you'll just like not notice it again. So not a very good perk. When I've seen it used, when I've seen it myself, I've been like, oh, I didn't know that my gun could do that, and then I just don't notice it because it doesn't happen again for a long time. So yeah, wildcard is just okay. I can see it being like okay on the machine gun. So we're gonna put this thing at the bottom of B tier, and yeah, I'm gonna just, I don't know, like put it somewhere in here. It's probably like here somewhere. Okay, so yeah, that concludes the origin trait tier list. If you guys are interested, there's a tab in the scoring spreadsheet on the origin traits, right? I'm gonna sort them by tier actually, so you can see all of them in order. So you know, it gives you the effect very, very clearly summarized. I thought the descriptions in the compendium were a bit long-winded, so I tried to summarize them as much as possible for PvE purposes, and I put some notable weapons. I put the condition as short as I could put it as well. So if you need an origin trait reference, there is one here for you. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about origin traits. Hopefully that video wasn't too long. I have no idea how long I've been talking. But yeah, I'm probably going to, you know, over the next month or so, you're going to see this entire set of tier lists be redone, and probably be a lot more thoughtful, hopefully. That's my goal. And yeah, next up, we're going to do rockets. You're going to see the rocket tier list come out after the sword tier list that comes out tomorrow. But it's going to be a little while because I'm going to have to restructure how I do my tier list entirely. So yeah, hopefully that's up to standard for you guys. I was very, very pleased actually to see a lot of you guys giving me some serious feedback on the tier list. Made me very happy, because at the end of the day, you know, I might speedrun and I might play a lot of endgame content, but I'm not perfect. I don't play everything, and I don't know every weapon from front to back, even though it might seem like I do. So you know, I really appreciate you guys' feedback, and if you have any more feedback, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll try to incorporate it into when we make the newer versions of these tier lists for next season. So yeah, that's it for now, and I hope you learned something about origin traits.